Imagine, just for a second, that you are sitting in a room with 12 brilliant minds. The air is super humid. You're in Phuket, Thailand, and it's the very first meeting of this really exclusive offline philosophy club.
Right, a really intense setting.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got your coffee, you sit down, and the question placed on the table right out of the gate is, will eternal life bring happiness?
And that single question, I mean, it's just immediately derailed everyone's expectations for the meeting.
Totally. And the stack of transcripts and notes from this exact meeting, well, that's what we are jumping into today for this deep dive.
Yeah, and what jumps out instantly is how this room, which was filled with, transhumanists, systems thinkers, movement practitioners, consciousness researchers, they completely abandoned the typical sci-fi talking points.
Right. They had to grapple with a profoundly human problem instead.
Exactly.
Which is really our mission here today. We're mapping out the architecture of that fierce debate about longevity, the search for meaning, and, the future of aging.
It's a massive topic.
It is. But going through these sources, I was just struck by some of the radical concepts they threw around. I mean, at one point, they are casually debating the logistics of literally transferring human consciousness into digital mediums.
Yeah, and I think it is crucial to frame how we navigate those specific concepts for you, the listener.
Good point.
Because throughout this deep dive, we're going to explore some highly controversial medical claims, extreme anti-aging protocols, and those futuristic hypotheses like consciousness transfer.
Which sound crazy.
Right. And we have to be clear that we are exploring these entirely as the ideological battlegrounds of the participants. We aren't taking sides here. These are their beliefs and debate points, not like peer-reviewed scientific facts.
So basically, we aren't promising you can download your brain to a flash drive next Thursday.
No, definitely not.
We are looking at the existential wall this group slammed into almost immediately. Because before they could even debate the technology of living forever, they hit this brutal psychological reality.
Yeah, the big question.
Right. If a person has no deep meaning or interest in their life right now, what exactly are they trying to prolong?
Which is such a wild thought because it fundamentally shatters the foundational assumption of the entire longevity movement.
How so?
Well, the default operating system for most people is that more time automatically generates more happiness.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this was like the first major clash in the transcripts.
It really was.
The transhumanist view in that room operated on this very linear logic. Like, if you possess a natural love for life, you inherently want more of it.
Right. More decades to learn, to fall in love, to accumulate experiences.
But the pushback to that logic was severe, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The skeptics in the room argued that time is merely an amplifier.
An amplifier.
Yeah. If someone is deeply unhappy, wandering through life without purpose or joy, handing them an extra century doesn't magically spark happiness. It simply stretches their existing misery across a much longer timeline.
Reading that section, I couldn't stop thinking about this analogy. I mean, is extending a fundamentally miserable life basically just asking a waiter for a larger portion of a terrible meal?
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Like, if the food is rancid, demanding a second plate makes zero sense. A genuinely happy person doesn't seem to cling to life with a greedy, desperate grip. They just, inhabit it.
Well, and from there, the conversation made this fascinating pivot from the quantity of time to the biological measurement of experience.
Oh, yeah, the measurement conflict.
Yeah, one participant who was approaching this as a systemic rationalist actually attempted to engineer a physiological formula for happiness.
Which sounds impossible.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But they propose tracking the ratio of chronic stress against actions performed purely out of alignment or love.
So trying to quantify vibes, basically.
Sort of. The underlying mechanism here is biological. Their hypothesis was that actions aligned with your authentic self trigger the parasympathetic nervous system.
And that's the rest and digest state.
Exactly. And that state literally facilitates cellular repair and regeneration. Conversely, existing in a state of chronic, unaligned stress keeps your cortisol elevated.
Which accelerates telomere shortening and ages you prematurely.
You got it.
Wait, so let me make sure I'm really getting this. They were trying to mathematically prove that being miserable physically degrades your cells, while living a meaningful life acts as a biological anti-aging mechanism.
That was the proposition, yeah.
Wow.
But the opposing view dismantled the idea that happiness can be reduced to a universal, trackable formula. I mean, happiness is just far too subjective.
Right, you can't just put it on a spreadsheet.
Exactly.
Mm.
Because if you engineer a perfectly frictionless, peaceful existence, you might optimize cellular repair, sure, but you also strip away all meaning for certain psychological profiles.
Oh, because some people need the chaos.
Yeah, some people actually require the amplitude of crisis. They need intense tension, the friction of overcoming trauma and high-stakes environments just to engage their dopamine systems and feel alive.
That makes total sense. So think about your own baseline as you were listening to this. Are you actively chasing more time, or are you chasing a higher amplitude of time?
That's the real question.
Because if a massively extended life requires a deep, resonant meaning to be worthwhile, the natural next question they debated was, well, does the impending threat of death actually create that meaning?
Right, and this introduces a biological and psychological phenomenon the group wrestled with called alesthesia.
Alesthesia.
Yeah, it's basically the mechanism of satiation. On a neurochemical level, your brain downregulates its response to constant stimuli.
Meaning you get used to things.
Exactly. Eventually, no matter how extraordinary the experience, as gourmet food, intense romance, profound art, your dopamine receptors adapt, and the baseline shifts. The extraordinary just becomes boring.
It's like the ultimate immortal burnout.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And the skeptic faction argued that finitude is the ultimate scarcity mechanic.
Meaning the deadline of death is what makes it matter.
Yeah. Right. The undeniable deadline of death is what forces the human brain to assign value to an experience. If you possess infinite tomorrows to watch a sunset, the mathematical probability is that you will eventually stop looking at it altogether.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the transhumanists completely rejected the idea that we need a deadline to care.
They did, yeah. They went hard against it.
They argued that the concept of death giving life meaning is nothing but a cultural marketing trick.
A coping mechanism, basically.
Exactly. It's a psychological coping mechanism we invented because historically we have just been utterly powerless against mortality. We essentially developed Stockholm syndrome with death just to feel better about the inevitable.
Right, and the counter-argument they had to alesthesia is that the universe contains infinite combinations of novelty.
Infinite things to do.
Yeah. The transhumanist position is that assuming we would run out of things to care about represents a massive failure of human imagination.
Let's test that, though. I mean, are we truly creatures who succumb to boredom that easily?
It's a fair pushback.
Let's use an analogy. The skeptic views life as a book. A book absolutely requires a final chapter, right? Without the ending, the narrative arc collapses and the story loses its emotional resonance.
Right.
But the transhumanist views life more like a language. A language doesn't have an end. You can continuously combine the same vocabulary to generate entirely new poetry, new philosophies, and new ideas forever.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the debate happening here wasn't about medical technology at all. It was a profound audit of human nature.
It really was.
Are we inherently consumers of experience?
Yeah.
Destined to eventually gorge ourselves, hit receptor satiation, and push back from the table? Or are we creators capable of utilizing that language to continuously generate new purpose?
And if we are creators, equipped with the capacity to infinitely generate meaning, why does the very concept of living forever make so many people physically shudder?
That's where things took a dark turn.
Yeah, the transcripts show a massive shift here. The conversation drops from the lofty philosophical fear of infinite boredom straight down into a visceral biological terror.
What's fascinating here is the revelation that emerged when the group was forced to articulate their deepest fears.
What did they say?
When pressed, the majority of the room admitted they weren't actually afraid of the end of consciousness. The void itself wasn't the terror. The true terror was the decline.
Wow. So they weren't fighting the Grim Reaper, they were fighting the nursing home.
Exactly. And to navigate this, the experts in the room had to rigorously define their terms, because public discourse recklessly throws wildly different concepts into a single bucket labeled immortality.
Right, we just lump it all together.
Yeah. So first you have biological rejuvenation. This is the localized reversal of aging mechanisms like clearing out senescent zombie cells that cause inflammation, allowing tissues to function as they did decades earlier.
Okay, that's...
Second is the concept of being physically unkillable, entirely immune to environmental trauma. Third is the digital upload, the radical separation of consciousness from biology.
Which is the super sci-fi one.
Right. And finally, there is longevity escape velocity, or LEV.
Wait, LEV is a concept that gets thrown around a lot in these circles. How exactly does the math on that work?
So longevity escape velocity is the hypothetical point where, for every chronological year you survive, medical science extends your life expectancy by more than 1 year.
Oh, so you're banking time.
Essentially, yes, you are outrunning the aging process through compounding technological breakthroughs. You just have to survive long enough to catch the next wave of innovation.
That distinction completely reframes the longevity pursuit. For most people, the nightmare isn't the cessation of a heartbeat. The nightmare is the slow, humiliating loss of physical autonomy.
Nobody wants that.
Right. The fear of chronic pain, the fading of cognitive clarity, and the transition from being an active subject who makes choices into an object of destruction that is merely acted upon by disease and time.
And that specific visceral dread of physical degradation is the engine driving the daily actions of longevity practitioners.
The people actually doing the work.
Yeah. The conversation shifted from existential dread to rigorous daily intervention. These individuals are not just philosophizing. They are running extreme, intensive protocols to stave off that decline today.
And the physical toolkits they discussed go way beyond generic health advice. I mean, we aren't just talking about getting 8 hours of sleep.
Not at all.
They view sleep as a non-negotiable biological software update. The intensity of their tracking is just staggering.
Because they treat the human body as an incredibly complex real-time dashboard. They aren't guessing how they feel. They're measuring cellular function.
Like with the blood panels.
Exactly. For instance, the heavy monitoring of ferritin levels. They aren't just checking for anemia, they are watching for iron accumulation, which essentially rusts the body from the inside out through cellular oxidation.
Which accelerates aging.
Yep.
And they are obsessively tracking heart rate variability, or HRV, using wearables.
Yeah, HRV is crucial because it doesn't just measure your pulse. It measures the microscopic time intervals between heartbeats.
Why does that matter so much?
That variance is a direct window into your nervous system. It tells you, mathematically, if your body is trapped in a sympathetic fight-or-flight state, which floods the system with aging stress hormones.
Or if you're safe.
Right. Or if you have successfully engaged the parasympathetic rest and digest state necessary for cellular repair.
But the physical protocols were only half of the equation, right? Because the psychological toolkits revealed a massive ideological split in the room regarding how to maintain a mind capable of living that long.
Oh, the divide was stark. One faction argued that professional psychotherapy is a biological imperative for longevity.
Like, you have to do therapy to live forever?
Essentially, their mechanism is straightforward. Unaddressed psychological trauma creates chronic physiological stress.
That makes sense.
Yeah, they argue you need an external professional to help dismantle the inner critic, process grief, and manage the emotional overheating that biologically tears the body apart over decades.
But the opposing side viewed outsourcing your mental state as incredibly dangerous.
They did. They advocated for a DIY, systems-based approach to the psyche. They argued that a longevity-focused human must view their own nervous system the way a master mechanic views a high-performance engine.
You have to fix it yourself.
Right. You need to understand the mechanical inputs and outputs of your own neurochemistry. You must learn the levers of your own stress responses to maintain psychological homeostasis independently, rather than blindly delegating your mental health to a therapist.
I have to push back on this entire biohacking framework, though. I mean, you can perfectly optimize your HRV, your fasting windows, your cellular oxidation, and your neurochemical levers.
You can be a perfect machine.
Exactly. You can build the most perfectly tuned biological machine in human history. But does a flawless protocol generate a reason to wake up in the morning?
Right back to the existential wall.
Yeah. Can you biohack a fundamental lack of purpose? If that existential foundation we discussed earlier is hollow, all those optimized blood panels are just preserving an empty vessel.
And that exact tension produced one of the most sobering quotes from the entire transcript.
Which one?
Amidst all the talk of escape velocity and cellular repair, one participant grounded the room by stating, eternal life won't happen all at once. It comes one day at a time.
Oh, wow. That pulls you right out of the speculative future and drops you squarely into this afternoon.
It really does.
You might have 150 years, but what are you actually doing with this Tuesday?
Exactly. And this introduces the final and perhaps most insurmountable obstacle the group identified. Let's assume you succeed.
Okay, let's assume.
You conquer the existential dread, you perfect the biological protocols, and you build this optimized, purpose-driven 150-year-old human.
Sounds great.
You still have to step outside your front door. How does human society function when the population stops dying on schedule?
Right. So what does this all mean? because you can biohack your cells, but you cannot biohack the global economy.
The systems thinkers mapped out the macro implications, and they are catastrophic if not managed.
I can imagine.
Our entire socioeconomic infrastructure is built around a specific biological timeline. Compounding interest, the hoarding of resources, the traditional 65-year retirement model, the transfer of wealth, all of it relies on people eventually dying.
Wait, so if people don't die,
If a billionaire can compound wealth for 300 years, while life-extending treatments remain accessible only to the ultra-rich, we are no longer looking at wealth inequality. We are looking at a literal biological divergence of the human species.
that is terrifying. But beyond the crushing economic realities, the psychological barrier they unpacked was staggering too.
A cultural paradox.
Yes, the cultural paradox of aging. We are a species desperately funneling billions of dollars into longevity research, while simultaneously existing in a culture that treats the elderly as entirely invisible.
This is a profound sociological insight. Globally, but particularly in Western cultures, we worship youth and heavily stigmatize old age. We equate aging with
You
obsolescence.
throw people away.
We do. And the participants argued that this cultural stigma is so deeply internalized that people will unconsciously sabotage their own biological longevity.
Just because of the dread of being socially categorized as old? I mean, the fear of becoming irrelevant or burdensome actually overrides the biological imperative to survive.
Because the stress of that societal rejection causes systemic inflammation. People will abandon their protocols or simply lose the psychological will to engage with the world, not because their biology failed, but because society signaled that their expiration date on relevance had passed.
So we don't just need a technological revolution in the laboratory, we desperately need a cultural rebranding of age.
We absolutely do.
If society refuses to value the wisdom of a 150-year-old mind, nobody is going to want to inhabit a 150-year-old body.
And if we synthesize the entirety of this debate, you can see how the architecture of this deep dive spans three distinct floors.
Let's recap them.
First, the existential floor. Do we possess the capacity to act as creators of infinite meaning? Or does our neurochemistry require the scarcity of death to value life?
Right, the boredom factor.
Second, the physical floor. The relentless granular protocols of biomarker tracking and cellular maintenance designed to outrun degradation, not death.
And the third floor.
The psychological and social floor. The monumental task of maintaining relevance and dismantling the cultural stigma of aging in a world built for finite lives.
What makes this specific transcript so compelling is that the room never retreated into naive fantasy. They conducted a brutally honest audit of what kind of life is actually worthy of being prolonged.
The medical technology, as advanced as it may become, is ultimately secondary to the philosophical foundation.
Yeah, and the central formula we've extracted today clarifies everything. A long life devoid of interest, autonomy, and purpose doesn't solve the human condition. It merely amplifies the tragedy.
Very well said.
But if a life is intricately put together, if it operates like a language, continuously generating connection and curiosity, then extending it isn't an act of desperation or greed. It is simply the logical continuation of a beautiful experience.
It fundamentally shifts the pursuit of longevity from a fearful retreat from death into an aggressive, joyous participation in life.
Which brings me to a final thought experiment I want to leave you with. A concept that builds on the foundation of this debate but brings it directly into your life today.
I love this part.
Imagine if, right now, as you are listening to this, you are handed a small pill. This pill guarantees with absolute, verifiable scientific certainty that you will live in vibrant, perfect health for exactly 500 years.
Half a millennium.
If you swallow that pill today, what is the very first habit, the very first toxic relationship, or the very first soul-crushing daily obligation you would immediately drop tomorrow morning, knowing you no longer have the excuse that life is too short to change course?
Because when you suddenly have 500 years on the clock, the situations you have been merely tolerating become instantly intolerable.
Picture yourself back in that humid room in Phuket, sitting at the table with those 12 brilliant minds, holding that 500-year pill in your hand. What is your next move?
Thank you for joining us on this exploration. We'll be back next time to dive into another stack of sources.
Until then, keep questioning the baseline. Catch you on the next deep dive.